Good morning, and thank you for joining us for this conversation on how permanent, inclusive, and expanded tax credits could help the future of American families and the economy. I'm Angelica Albaladejo, a reporter with the news organization Capital in Maine, and I'm pleased to welcome you all on behalf of our hosts, Community Change Action and Economic Security Project Action. Ahead of Father's Day, we've brought together a lawmaker, a business leader, advocates, and affected fathers to reflect on the recent expansion of the child tax credit and the earned income tax credit, which may be a once-in-a-generation opportunity to lift millions of American families out of poverty and give our economy a boost. So how will the temporary expansion of these tax credits boost our economy and business sector? How will families that have suffered from generational, racialized, and gendered poverty benefit? And what would happen if we make direct cash support for families permanent? To get the conversation started, Dorian Warren, a progressive scholar, organizer, and co-president of Community Change Action, will speak with U.S. Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, who represents New York's 8th Congressional District and is a champion of the child tax credit expansion.
Well, thank you so much, Angelica. And I really want to thank Capital in Maine for moderating this very important conversation. And before we bring up Chairman Jeffries, I just want to say a few words about why the child tax credit is so important. As many of you maybe have heard, and many of you maybe not, there is this expansion in the American Rescue Plan of something called the child tax credit. It is direct cash payments to caretakers and parents of children under the age of 17 and under, and it's worth roughly $250 or $300 a month, direct to you as a parent per child. This is, in the long sweep of American history, pretty transformative potentially, because we know a few things about the child tax credit. One, it would actually reduce child poverty in this country enormously. Some estimates up to 50% of child poverty would be cut, but especially for Black, Indigenous, Latinx children in this country, we know that this would make a transformative difference in their lives. Second, we know that having direct cash in people's pockets enables them to survive and thrive. If you're struggling to put food on the table for your kids, if you're struggling to pay for diapers for your kids, if you're struggling just to pay basic necessities that will benefit your kids, this is on the way. And in fact, starting July 15th, the IRS will have a portal up, especially for those who maybe have not filed taxes. You got to file your taxes to get it, to go file your taxes so that you can start getting your monthly benefit, your monthly child tax credit benefit. And last but not least, let me say that we know the difference the child tax credit will make over generations. We know that for children that receive the child tax credit for their parents, their health outcomes, their educational outcomes, their economic outcomes are all much better over their lifetime. And that benefits us. If kids today are doing better, then that benefits us later tomorrow. So we're very excited for the expansion of the child tax credit over this next year. Let me remind you that it is only temporary. So we will be talking with our panelists that Angelica is going to moderate. We'll be talking about how to make this fight permanent and fully inclusive. So we need to extend the child tax credit, but we need to make sure that everybody's included, particularly immigrant children. So Angelica, while we're waiting for the congressman, I actually want to ask you to say a bit more from Capital in Maine about why you are covering this issue. And maybe if you could take a minute, and then I'll bring the chairman back in.
Sure thing. So I am typically covering immigration issues at Capital in Maine. And this child tax credit issue in California, the state where we are based and do most of our coverage, has been a really interesting question of whether undocumented immigrants should be included in this kind of a program. And through our reporting, we found that these individuals do pay taxes. They are working and living in California and interacting in the community, and they are really using these tax credits to benefit not only themselves and their families, but putting that money directly back into the economy. So that's the kind of coverage that we've been interested in looking at. And I'm really looking forward to speaking with the panelists today and also hearing from Representative Hakeem Jeffries about how these things can continue to be expanded at the federal level, especially when it comes to individuals who've been left out in the past, like undocumented immigrants.
Well, thanks for your coverage. I just want to remind everybody, Capital and Main is a nonpartisan, nonprofit, amazing journalistic organization. And with that, I want to bring in Chairman Jeffries. Chairman Jeffries, who is New York's 8th Congressional District Representative. He is a champion of the child tax credit expansion. And I am so excited to get a chance to talk to you, sir, not just as a policymaker, but father, around why this is so important. You've been a champion of the child tax credit expansion. We know that it benefits so many million Americans. And here at Community Change Action, we do advocacy on the outside. We're trying to change the external conditions every day. But tell us what it's like for you to work on this issue from the inside. What have you found to be an effective approach to advancing the child tax credit, sir?
Well, good morning. It's great to be with you. And thank you for all the work that you do, as well as Community Change Action, in terms of your tremendous advocacy on this issue and in so many other areas. You know, it's been, I think, a tremendous journey for us here as House Democrats, working in partnership with the Senate Democratic majority and, of course, President Biden and Vice President Harris, to do what Joe Biden promised he would do last year, which is to build back better. And that fundamentally, I think, is the approach that we are working to bring to life. Because as we emerge from the pandemic, we cannot return to pre-pandemic normalcy, because we know during pre-pandemic normalcy, there were far too many people, far too many communities, far too many children and parents and families who were left behind. We know half the American people reported prior to the pandemic that they could not afford a sudden, unexpected $400 expense, let alone the type of monthly expenses, Dorian, that you referenced in terms of food or clothing or shelter or diapers to be able to provide for the health and well-being of a newborn baby. And so in that vein, the enhanced child tax credit payable on a monthly basis really does help bring to life this notion of advancing fairness and justice and opportunity and building back better in America.
So Chairman Jeffries, I want to pick up on what you just said, because this is really important. You said we cannot return to pre-pandemic normalcy. And I think that's spot on. And frankly, as the father of, we might call it a pandemic baby. My baby was born in October last year in the midst of the pandemic, when everything was still closed. I can tell you firsthand just how hard it is as a new parent, as a new father, for diapers, for books, for all the things I need for my baby girl. So I want to ask you in terms of what might be the new normal. So we're not going back to pre-pandemic normalcy, but what is the new normal? Because it does feel like there's a sea change occurring in our politics around the role of government. And families are getting real choices, they're getting real power. The child tax credit is going to give families that, but we know conservatives are going to push back. So I want to ask you about this pushback, because we know we're going to hear some of the old tired racist tropes, anti-government rhetoric. So talk to us about the messaging on the child tax credit and the narrative and the storytelling we should be telling. We should be talking about what's the story to tell, and what are some of the political hurdles to overcome here?
Great question. Well, as House Democrats, we talk a lot about fighting for the people. And at the end of the day, that means making sure we fight for the poor, the sick, the afflicted, for children, for families, for the working class, for middle class folks, for those who aspire to be part of the middle class, for the least, the lost, and the left behind. That's our approach. I think that's the American way at the end of the day, that when you work hard and play by the rules, you should be able to provide a comfortable living for yourself and for your family. That's the American contract, and it's been broken over the last several decades, as we've seen the rise of right-wing conservatism attempting to demonize the role of government. The interesting thing is, right, one of the biggest governmental interventions that we've seen in recent years took place in 2017 with the GOP tax scam, which saddled our children and grandchildren with $2 trillion worth of debt for a tax scam where 83% of the benefits went to the wealthiest 1%. So their focus is on the wealthy, the well-off, and the well-connected. That's their version of governmental intervention. Our view and the child tax credit fits squarely within this vision, and is Exhibit A, is to invest in American families, to invest in creating opportunity and eventually prosperity in every single zip code, and to do it in a way that is sensible. Because the child tax credit, traditionally payable, if eligible, once a year, when we know people have expenses every month. And that is why this direct payment will now be issued every month. Moving forward, the challenge, as you suggested, Doreen, is going to be to make sure we expand the eligibility, including the mixed status children in mixed status families, and of course that we make sure that we make it permanent moving forward.
I so appreciate you, Chairman Jeffries, of mentioning especially expanding and inclusivity, because as you mentioned, the 2017 GOP tax scam was a tax scam, and we know that 1 million children of immigrant families were excluded in that tax scam in 2017. And those are I-10 filers. So those are people that pay taxes. Those are immigrants who pay taxes who got stripped out from the CTC and EITC. So I appreciate your advocacy on this. Two more questions. With the CTC, the child tax credit payments hitting people's bank accounts next month, talk to us about what you think is the role of government, along with grassroots organizations that we work with at Community Change Action. How do we work together to ensure that people who are eligible get these benefits?
Well, you know, we recently, in the last week, had a Caring Economy Week of Action. And that involves a whole host of things. But the child tax credit is certainly an important part of our vision in terms of America investing in the caring economy. Taking care of children fundamentally is one of our most precious and sacred responsibilities. On Monday, led by the White House, we here on the Hill are going to have a child tax credit day of action, where we begin to just communicate with our constituents about what is coming and how to prepare to receive it. And I've had a telephone town hall as recently as yesterday. Many of us are doing it, where the child tax credit was one of several issues that came up, but a very prominent one. And pointing things out, like you will receive a letter from the IRS, as some people have already received, indicating that this is coming. It's not a scam. You're not being hustled. This is government in action in the highest possible way. And that's the other point that I think is going to be important to make, that, who's in office makes a difference. And not advocating for any particular candidate, but saying research those individuals who are seeking your vote, participate in our democracy, and hold those people accountable to see that the things that they've talked about doing, they actually do. And I believe that in the context of the American Rescue Plan generally, and the child tax credit specifically, this is an example of us trying to keep that promise that I mentioned earlier of building back better and making a difference in terms of the quality of life in a real and tangible way. Who's in office matters, government matters. And you've got the GOP tax scam as one example on one extreme, and you've got the American Rescue Plan as another example of, I think, forward-looking, progressive governmental action to make a difference in the lives of everyday Americans.
Chairman Jeffries, I'm trying to contain myself from saying amen, but really appreciate your leadership on this. I have one more personal question, because I could talk to you all day about the policy details and what's needed. But as a father, and I happen to know you're also an uncle, as a father, though, what does this mean to you?
Well, I think it's just so incredibly important and congratulations, or as we would say in Brooklyn, mazel tov, being a relatively new father of a pandemic baby. But I think there's nothing better, in my view, than being able to raise children and provide for them and see them grow and flourish. And we know a lot of people in America, in inner city America, urban neighborhoods like those that I represent at home in New York City, in Bedford-Stuyvesant, East New York, parts of Brownsville that I served, West End, Coney Island. We have parents who are raising children in very tough conditions. And there's nothing more disruptive or painful, I think, for a parent than being unable to provide for the needs of your child. And the child tax credit is really going to meet that need in a very meaningful and transformational way. And we think that that's one of the reasons why we're going to fight as hard as we can to make it permanent.
Chairman Jeffries, thank you so much for spending this time with us today as we go into Father's Day. Congratulations on the Brooklyn victory last night, by the way, and we really appreciate all you do. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dorian.
And with that, I'm going to toss it back to Angelica and our panel, which I'm really, really, really excited to hear from. So the mic is back to you, Angelica.
Thank you so much, Dorian and Representative Jeffries, for that really illuminating chat. Now, I'm honored to keep the conversation going with a group of advocates. Ben Chin is the Deputy Director of the Maine People's Resource Center, where he worked on community organizing campaigns for the last 15 years. After his run for mayor of Lewiston, he was named one of the Frederick Douglass 200 for his efforts toward racial justice. His report on universal family care, which includes universal child care and home health care for seniors and those with disabilities, has become a model for state and federal campaigns. Stephanie Bonin is an entrepreneur who owns restaurants in Denver, Colorado and Brattleboro, Vermont. Her petition on change.org, calling for recurring direct cash payments during the pandemic, has gathered more than 2 million signatures. She's a longtime advocate for supporting small businesses and directs the nonprofit Downtown Brattleboro Alliance. So thank you so much for joining us, Ben and Stephanie. My first question is actually for both of you. And I wanted to know, what is a defining moment, either in your own life or in American history, that made you an advocate for income support, like this child tax credit that we're talking about today? Maybe we can start with Ben.
Sure. Well, so great to be with all of you. So I think I'd first think about American history, and I came of age sort of in the politics of neoliberalism, where moving cash to families was something that people used to think was a little politically scary. And the reason for that was it had become racially stigmatized. And one important fact about American history that I learned in working on these issues over the years is that back in the end of the 1940s, the U.S. used to spend 3 times as much on cash public assistance to family as the programs that we know as Social Security today. And it was a broad, grassroots, multiracial coalition of labor unions and civil rights organizations and feminist organizations that really made that possible. And then it was after that started disproportionately benefiting folks like women of color, Black women in particular, that we started seeing this deliberate attempt to use public assistance to try to control families, to try to create racial and economic and gender hierarchies, to sort of push some women out of the workforce and other women into it. And I think the time has really come, and we're seeing this in the child tax credit right now, where we're actually about ready to move beyond that. And we can see how moving cash to families is actually about establishing a much more equal contract, like the chairman was just talking about, around how we can actually fight inequality and make a society that works for everybody and brings all sorts of people together. And I think it's really exciting to be at a moment where the kind of possibilities that have been off the table for almost a century are actually getting put back on today.
Thank you so much, Ben. And I've just gotten word that we have another panelist joining us. So I'm so pleased to be able to introduce EPI, who is a Black immigrant father from the Worker Center for Racial Justice in Chicago. He lost his job during the pandemic and couldn't access unemployment insurance because of his citizenship status. His family is, however, benefiting from the child tax credit because his wife qualifies. So I'm really glad to have the three of you here, and I'm going to continue pushing forward this question, and perhaps we can have Stephanie answer next about a defining moment either in her own life or in American history that made her an advocate for income support.
Sure. First, I want to acknowledge that I'm not a father, but my two girls are home with their awesome dad so that I can be here. You know, my defining moment is that I was forced by COVID to lay off my entire staff at my restaurant. And you don't shake that easily. You know, as a business owner, one of your pivotal roles is to provide a platform for people to make a livelihood. And when that gets yanked away, you can't help but feel like, what next? How, you know, those bills keep coming in, and yet the paychecks don't, they stop. And so it really made me have a very new lens on how we support our community in this country and the importance that we place on work being the only way of having any type of financial means, and also safety net and all of those things.
EPI, I'd be interested to hear your answer to this as well. What is a defining moment for you?
First, I want to say thank you, Stephanie. Your response was selfless and thinking about others more than how it actually affected your business running in income and revenue from your end. That's amazing, and it kind of ties into my response to that as well, because it wasn't much about me, but it was a lot about the family that I'm put in place to protect, provide for, and love. And I think with the pandemic and losing my job, it kind of definitely like dug a hole. And I will say, you know, I got into some kind of depressed state as well, because most important thing to me became, hey, how do I provide for my family? And that became a far-fetched answer, considering I couldn't figure out any source of income because I couldn't work anymore. Losing my job was just not the end of it, because I also couldn't get another job because of my status was tied to what's it called now, to my job. So with losing that, I had no other alternative but to sit out. I couldn't work or do anything. So definitely being at that hospital, welcoming my child, and just understanding that, you know, it was going to be a struggle for me to provide for that child was definitely something that put a lot of thoughts in my head.
Well, you know, I'm glad that you mentioned that, because it seems like the pandemic has really laid bare a lot of the long-standing inequities that make this kind of cash support more important than ever. I wondered, EPI, if you could continue this conversation about what it was like to be in that position, knowing that it was your immigration status that was keeping you from accessing some of these benefits that would have otherwise been available to you, and what the child tax credit that you received through your wife has done for your family.
Thank you so much for that question. Most importantly, I want to state this. Since my entry into the country, I have understood my position as an immigrant. And that has been thrown in my face a lot of times, whether it was doing like a job search or just getting into college and, not being not being able to play on certain teams that would have guaranteed me scholarships. It's definitely been a lot like just leading up to this. But I think it's been refreshing, to just have a conversation about potentially being able to get some kind of break, amidst everything I've had to go through, to mention a few, like I just said, with not being able to play on certain teams, with not being able to work on campus, it's definitely been a lot. So it's just great just to imagine that there is something possibly brewing for persons like me.
Hmm. And while we're talking about the way that the pandemic changed things so fundamentally and really revealed a lot of these issues, even for folks who didn't really have this on their radar beforehand, Stephanie, I wanted to know what really inspired you to make that call for recurring direct cash payments, and why do you think millions of other Americans signed your petition?
Sure. So the petition you're referring to is the change.org petition that I started in March of 2020. And I started it because, like I shared before, having to lay off the entire staff and not have a game plan is a really scary moment. And I needed to take that fear that was in me and channel it somehow and feel like I was going to be in the conversation on what change could look like in terms of having financial support during this entire pandemic and crisis. And I have been really amazed at how many people have signed it. It's almost at 2.5 million people now. But then when I stop for 2 more seconds, I'm not really that amazed. COVID gave us all new experiences. And for a lot of us, it gave us an opportunity to walk in shoes that we have never walked in before. So I have never been on unemployment. I have never had to put my hand out and ask for public assistance. That is something that millions of people have never done before. And then the other sets of millions of people have had to ask for help on top of what they were already asking for. So all these new experiences that people were forced to rock bottom, and what could it look like if that changes, and not just for this pandemic, but ongoing. Are we all realizing that we need to make sure that our country takes care of each other for the long haul and always?
Mm-hmm. We've talked so far about how expanding these tax credits for parents, for low-income workers, for immigrants will really help these communities and the economy. Ben, I wanted to hear a bit more about your organizing work promoting a tax credit specifically for caregivers who lose their income because they're caring for either an elderly or disabled family member. And I wanted to know, what impact would a caregiver tax credit have on families and the economy?
Absolutely. Well, these issues are all connected, so I really appreciate the question, Angelica. So there's a bill that we're working to get funded, like right now, today, in Maine, sponsored by Representative Cloutier, to fund a tax credit that would be very similar to the child tax credit. It would be on the state level, and it would say, care, providing for loved ones who are elderly or disabled is real work, and it actually is important, and people need to have resources and cash to make that possible. And having a little tax credit is a great way to make sure that folks can actually access that. And to kind of connect this to the child tax credit, a lot of us, have elder parents who are aging, and we have young kids. And so if you're contemplating how the costs of that add up, in Maine, the average cost of full-time care for an elderly person at home is over $40,000 a year, which is most which is more than what most families in Maine make in an entire year. So it's basically an entire year of income gets wiped out providing this. There's no backstop in Medicare or any other federal program to cover that unless you spend down all the money you saved over your entire life to qualify for Medicaid. And thinking about what this means for families that have kids in daycare, it puts you in this impossible situation because you have to decide, is it actually cheaper for me to just quit my job to just try to provide full-time care to my aging loved ones? Or do I try to find some way to work and pay daycare bills when full-time childcare typically costs more than in-state tuition in most colleges, in most public colleges in most states? So you don't have 18 years of your kid's life to save up for that. It's really in year one, if you're working, you suddenly have to pay for the cost of college for your kids to go to childcare. And so to kind of put all this together, what does this $250, $300, $350 mean for folks? In my kids' childcare right now, there's these sort of summer enrichment programs where they can learn how to swim or learn how to play soccer. And it's about another $150, $200 a month to access that. And so if you're a family right now that doesn't know how you're going to work because you got to take care of elderly parents, which is a really common thing, and you're struggling to pay the cost of childcare, suddenly, are you going to be able to have your kid be able to swim, be able to play soccer, be able to kind of do these things that I think all families would really love to have their kids do, and not have their kid be the only one in their school who doesn't know how to participate in those activities. So these amounts of money, they're so small. Chairman Jeffries talking about all the money that we've given out to the top 1% in the last few years. And families are just saying, we just want a small fraction of what the wealthy have been getting. And then suddenly at the end of the day, our parents are going to have what they need, our kids are going to have what they need, and our whole society is going to be a lot better off.
Thank you so much, Ben. On that note, EPI, I'd really be interested to hear a bit more about your personal experience receiving benefits through the child tax credit and what that's done for your family.
Thanks so much. My personal experience is it's a long one. I've definitely been in this since I've arrived the country, but particularly losing my job last year definitely dug a deep hole for me and my family. Considering I was working with one of the multinational corporations in the country. After graduating college, I got a sponsorship to work with the organization, but because of COVID, I was laid off. But it was something different about being laid off as an immigrant because my job there was tied to my immigration status. And with losing that job meant I had to get another job within a certain time frame or leave the country. And at this time, I was expecting a kid, and I had a wife who relied on me for a lot of things. So it was definitely a really tough time just having to shoulder that thought of what was the next step or what was the next move for me. And with that came the fact that I lost, of course, all the benefits that came with the job. So I didn't have any health benefits anymore. I didn't have any gym benefits anymore. I didn't have any sorts of extra help coming my way. And the previous administration also made it kind of difficult to start a process of filing through my wife, who's a U.S. citizen, and kind of try to expedite that and get me back working. So even up till date, I still can't work because there's a lot of backlogs. There's a lot of hurdles to climb over. So it's definitely been quite an experience going through all these hurdles and try to get things working back for me. But I think most importantly, as I said earlier, it's a breath of fresh air, just knowing that there is this organization, there's this people who come together to think about this and try to advocate for CTC. Ever since I saw that, actually, first time I saw was on the president's address, and I'm like, wow, this is amazing. Just the potential is amazing, and it definitely was a breath of fresh air, as I said earlier. And I think some of the things that I think about is, as I said earlier, being able to provide, being able to protect, and being able to love my family as I should. And for a lot of people, for a lot of men like myself, it's harder in a situation where you feel as though there is no tangible income coming in to show love, especially when you yourself don't feel loved by by people around or by the community that you live in. And I've had to climb out of that and get myself in the right position because I'm Christian as well. And reading through the Bible, I came across the scripture that said a man that cannot provide for his family is worse off than an infidel. You see, a lot of these things continue to sink in my mind, and I'm out there trying to make things work. But I do not take for granted this opportunity for the CTC because honestly, it is a breath of fresh air for me and my family.
Thank you so much for sharing about your own experience with this and just showing how much this really impacts individuals. It's not just a policy that's happening in DC, it's something that's really affecting the lives of people across the country. So, I have one more question that I would like to put to all of you. And that is that I'd like to give you each the chance to either debunk a misconception about income support or to tell those who are tuned in how they can support this kind of work that you all are encouraging.
I can go first if you want.
Great.
Okay, so I'd like to debunk the idea that these types of direct payments stop people from taking jobs. So I need staff. My restaurant is not fully staffed, so even though we can go to capacity, we can't because we don't have enough staff. I'm clear on that. And I also don't know the answer to why there aren't enough staff, but I can tell you that $300 a month is not enough for someone to say no to a job. I see these child checks working in tandem with who I am as a business owner. So for the first time ever, we are trying to offer healthcare to everyone. We're a tiny restaurant. We seat 65 people, but we're trying. That means we can't offer full healthcare, but what can we do? We can offer a small portion of money to go toward your healthcare and create a system. So when I see these child checks, I see my employees matching me halfway. I put a little bit in, they put a little bit in. And when I say they, I really mean our government matching me halfway. So we're all in it together trying to take care of each other. But when I ask someone to work a Sunday brunch and their kids aren't in school, that $300 check can go towards a babysitter so they can work Sunday brunch. But it does not stop someone from getting a job because I don't know about you, but I can't live off of $300 a month. And even if I had 4 kids, I couldn't live off of that once a month check. So debunk that.
I really appreciate what Stephanie was laying out there. I and maybe I'll just build on it by saying it's these programs are what allow people to work. I mean, if you have to cover the costs of childcare and elder care and all these other things in order to work, it just is not possible for you to have the ability to go out there and show up to your job if the people who you loved are not taken care of. And if it's really expensive to take care of them, you can't get out of the house in the morning if that's going to happen. And I'll say too, what EPI just laid out there, I was extremely moved by and really appreciate what he's saying. And I think my closing thought about how these myths in our society can kind of harm us, I think has to do a little bit with this Father's Day theme that we're talking about here. And what does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a father? What does it mean to take care of people? And absolutely the only way forward out of these really tough situations that modern American families have, is men and women both need to be able to have time with their family. And we've got to see that as valued. And if we don't actually provide real resources to make that happen, it just isn't going to happen. And so for women in particular who are concerned about the gender wage gap, men absolutely need to be able to take time off of work step back from their careers to take care of families. And that's got to become a socially acceptable practice so that more people can do that and everybody can actually share those responsibilities. And if there's so much pressure on all of us, but particularly dads, to be out there and to just work 2-3 jobs in order to make ends meet and only see our value as what we're able to bring home that way, we're just not going to be able to change these things. And the child tax credit is the way. It's a way. It's one of the most important ways on the table right now where we can actually give families the resources so that mothers and fathers and all kinds of different family arrangements can show up for their kids and their loved ones the way that they want to, without being forced into these roles that aren't working for any of us anymore.
Oh, thank you, Ben. Thank you, Stephanie. Honestly, like a lot of the things you mentioned, kind of like what I was, thinking about as well. And, these and many more are the reasons why I'm a member of the Workers Center for Racial Justice and a leader as well. And I think about this, and honestly, it doesn't solve the problem. The CTC doesn't solve the problem in its entirety because it's a huge problem. It's, that's why it's called a rescue act, right? There is something to be rescued here. And this is a huge step in the right direction. And it gives hope. It gives love to people who feel as though they're not loved. It gives hope to people who feel like all hope is lost. You have a lot of men leaving their families because they don't feel as though they can provide for that family. This is a huge step in the right direction for me. I think definitely what this has done is this has shown that we care about you and we are doing something to help this situation. And that's the thought that matters. Just that thought that there is something being done gives hope to a lot of people.
Thank you so much, EPI, Stephanie, and Ben. The last thing that I wanted to put to you all, since we're talking ahead of Father's Day, is just if you have any final thoughts about how this child tax credit is really going to support fathers.
Yeah, I think building a little bit on this whole discussion that we've been having, I would really offer that for as I'm thinking about the kind of dad I want to be, how I want to be a role model for my kids. One of the most important things that I've noticed is when I'm able to be a good father, when I'm not, is if I wake up in the morning and I am tired and stressed and exhausted and worrying sick about the budget and what bills are going to get paid and when, I am not a good dad. It's very easy for me to just get really sharp with my kids and grumpy, and then suddenly they're miserable and their mom's miserable, and we're like the few precious hours that we have in the morning and the few precious hours that we have in the night where we're not working, they're suddenly not about being able to enjoy time together as a family and really setting our kids up for success and enjoying their life and their growth. They're just stuck fighting about dumb things because that's just what stress, particularly economic stress, does to you. It just takes that kind of toll on the family. And these margins that we're talking about, totally agree with what EPI is saying. Like, this is just a down payment. We're just getting started in terms of what we need to do to finish to address this problem. But if we individualize the problem and say it's like, oh, in those moments where you're being grumpy with your kids, that's just about you as an individual. We don't pull the lens back and say, no, this is actually a structural problem. It's because people are so stressed out. They don't have money. They're not making the family budget. And we all have a responsibility to fix that. Those moments are not about what it means to be an individual father. They're about, do we value fatherhood and motherhood and families in general in our society? And if we really do, we will put our money where our mouth is and fund the CTC and other programs like it. And so that's, to me, that's what the real test of our values is about. And so it's absolutely nice on Father's Day to get a hammer or a tie or just a day off from the chores or a barbecue or whatever. But I think what I really want as a father is I want every father in America to not be stressed about the money that's coming in the door so that they can focus on loving their kids. Because that is the number one thing I think that all fathers really want to do and really want to put their time into.
Yeah, I love that. And I also know there are a lot of cultures out there that measure the success of their of their country, or in how are the children doing. And I think that fathers, I'm going to speak for fathers, also measure the success of themselves, of how is my family doing? Are my kids happy? And the CTC has a chance to cut poverty, childhood poverty, in half. I would say that that is something that we should never go backwards on. And I'm going to echo Ben that this is a gift for Mother's Days for years to come, for Father's Days for years to come. This is what we can do as a country today. We value and measure our success in the happiness and the well-being of our children.
Well, for me as well, I want to see this as a good conversation I'm going to have with my kids, because I remember growing up in an economy that was receding and currently is in a recession. And I remember having conversations with my dad about how it was worthless, right? Now, I'm able to say to my kid, if this continues and we propose and we expect and we are very hopeful that this will be a trend going upwards, I'm able to have a positive conversation with my kid to tell them that there is hope. You know, there is hope. There is light at the end of this tunnel. It's not all bad. There is some kind of hope coming our way. And whatever situation we have found ourselves in or we have to grow past, this is the right direction we are heading in now.
Thank you so much, EPI, Stephanie, and Ben, for joining us for this conversation. I think it's about time for me to kick things back to Dorian Warren to close things out for us today. Dorian, I believe you might be muted.
You would think that after a year on Zoom, I would figure out the mute button. So as I was saying, thank you so much, Angelica. Thank you to all of you for joining us today. A very special thanks to Stephanie, to Ben, to EPI for joining our panel, to you, Angelica, for moderating today's discussion. I also need to thank the Economic Security Project Action for co-hosting, and of course, Capital and Maine, a great journalistic organization doing incredible reporting. So please check them out. And last but not least, I have to thank the Community Change Action crew for producing yet another great event. I just want to share a couple comments and then enlist you into action before we close out. So Stephanie, I just want to say I am so struck by much of what you said. You said we don't have a safety net in this country, which has been true for way too long. And what if you challenge us to think about what could it look like if that changes with these child checks? And in some ways, the child tax credit means we could have a safety net, which is essentially a guaranteed income for kids and families. It's an income floor for children and parents, but it's only temporary. So we have to fight to make it permanent. Stephanie, I also like the fact that you mentioned the key question on the health, well-being, and success in any country or community. How are the children doing? It's actually that simple. And this country has failed our children for way too long. We can abolish child poverty. We can abolish poverty, period. But we can abolish child poverty, and let's set our sights on that North Star to make that happen by the end of this decade. Ben, I just have to say, you told us that we're just getting started in organizing to address all of these problems and challenges we have, and especially for parents struggling to make ends meet. And you reminded us that this is not an individual problem. It's not an individual problem for fathers or mothers. And you talked about how you want every father in America not to be stressed so that we can all love our kids. So thank you for that. And then EPI, I'm just so struck by your heartfelt story of your experience, particularly as a Black immigrant in this country, the hurdles that you've had to fight and overcome. And you said this one thing that I'm going to be thinking about throughout the rest of the week and into Father's Day, that every father, and of course every mother, but every father just wants to provide, protect, and love our family and our kids. So I'm gonna walk with that for a long time. We all know that everyone should have the ability to provide for and care for their families. Investing in our children is not just a political choice. It is a moral choice, it is the right choice, and it is a smart choice. And so for the future of our children and our economy, we will continue to mobilize families to make sure they get the benefits that all of us deserve, that were extended to all of us in the American Rescue Plan, monthly direct payments to families around the child tax credit. How do we make that permanent? How do we ensure that everyone, regardless of immigration status, is included and has a chance to thrive? So join us. Tell a friend who might not know about what you heard here today. Follow us on social media. You can find us on Twitter. You can find us on Instagram. Yes, you can find us on TikTok at COMMCHANGEACT or Community Change Act. Support our campaign. Text CTC to 40649. Text CTC to 40649 and get people to the IRS portal, which is now opened. So stay tuned for July 8th week of actions on the child tax credit and the earned income tax credit that we'll be doing alongside our partners, Economic Security Project Action. We know that the child tax credit is going to help millions of families get advance payments this summer. And the portal is now open. So with that, happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there. And as you celebrate this weekend, again, tell a friend, tell a family member, tell a father or an uncle or a godfather about the child tax credit. And as EPI said to us, walk with both hope and love. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.